Please briefly summarize your education and industry background.
I have a degree in chemistry from Xavier University and a certificate in community development finance.
So you have a history of advocacy, both before and after a 2016 accident that I believe left you paralyzed. Can you
Yes.
talk about what you were focused on prior to the accident and how it changed your life and your advocacy focus?
Well, prior to the accident, I think my advocacy was more focused around equity related issues in communities, systemic racism. Um, After the accident, I think my personal identity shifted, where I was a mixed American before. Now I'm a disabled mixed American. And that disability supersedes all of my other personal identity, right? And I think a lot of times when people are new to the disabled community, they go through that same journey from a self-identity perspective. But what I realized quickly was that the disability civil rights issues were very similar to the other equity rooted advocacy issues that I was working on. Except this population is just so much larger. And so, it was an easy transition.
Do you feel like you had some insight because of your other advocacy roles, or did this, like you said, kind of superseded it? Did it make it like compounding the multiple different equity and advocacy points that you had going on?
I mean, it helped that I had some experience, right? I think experience always helps, but I wasn't prepared for this, not for the advocacy like that this takes.
All right. So, what is the Split Second Foundation you founded? Where does the name come from? What does it hope to achieve? And what are some of its accomplishments so far?
Anybody's life can change in a split second. Mine did after a tragic diving accident. I quickly learned how under-resourced communities were in terms of post-therapy, maintenance programs, mental health, social work, making sure people had all of the equipment that they needed in the home, proper transportation to get to and from doctor's appointments, work, workforce development. There was just a huge lack of everything. And so we started to kind of address that, taking on one thing at a time, but building out a holistic program that we hope will be a new innovative healthcare model.
What about some of the things that you've actually done and something you might call an accomplishment?
We opened the first holistic wellness facility in the Gulf South called Split Second Fitness, where it encompasses fitness, mental health, case management, workforce development, all of those things that I just described. But the big goal too was like to make sure that people with disabilities were living the highest quality of life possible, that they had something to look forward to, so they would stop focusing on looking backwards and all the what ifs that come with having an accident or stroke or anything, and really be the support system for a lot of people. And I think those are all like really monumental accomplishments. We've impacted hundreds of families, and to see their response to our staff and the services that we provide is humbling.
So, our audience is mostly engineers who designed the built environment. Can you
Mm-hmm.
describe some common challenges you and others with disabilities face when trying to navigate infrastructure?
My first 2 months navigating the built environment from this new perspective, I learned how important curb cuts were. Because a lot of times I would get on a block and have to make sure I'm looking at the end of the block to see if I can get down. But if there was any changes in the terrain, even the slant that we put on sidewalks to make sure that the rain can roll into the street properly, it adds a extra set of force. So people with manual chairs are working harder with one arm than the other, right? And so those little things, definitely going into old buildings that uh, superseded the ADA, huge challenges because a lot of them will just have steps in weird places, and we're just like, why would we build this way? But a lot of times I think architects are building beautiful spaces for abled people, and viewing it from the abled lens. But and so I've started to do a lot of I would say advocacy work and awareness work, putting people in a wheelchair with me so that they see life from my perspective briefly. And people's reaction to that has been eye-opening. And so going back to your question, though, I think it's all of those little intangibles that, used to be an afterthought. Now, how do we push universal design principles to the forefront of every conversation and every design and every, space that we're building?
What should engineers know more about when considering how they design for better access? What are some of those things that, most people, I'm sure, didn't even think of until all of a sudden they needed to?
On the hospitality side, hotels, how we design the bathroom. A lot of times we're checking ADA boxes and not making spaces functional, right? So I've gone to hotels where I go to the bathroom, shower heads on one side and knob and the benches on the other, and you can't reach it. It's like, I get it. You check the boxes, but this doesn't work for people. Bed heights being too high, that's not so much an engineer's issue. How we incorporate ramps into the landscape design of a space, right? So it's not just another big one. Like a lot of times I'll go to restaurants and the ramp or ADA entrance will be in the back or something, right? And I'm like, why do I have to enter through the back door? Why is it that this is where we wanted to put this ramp, and why couldn't we build up the sidewalk if necessary so that there was a level boarding situation? On the transportation side, so I'm also the chairman for the Regional Transit Authority here. We operate, maintain, and administer the buses, streetcars, paratransit, and ferry services for New Orleans in the regional area. The St. Charles streetcar is our historic line. It's 100 years old. Out of 54 total cars, only 3 of them are outfitted with an accessible lift. And out of 62 total stops, only 6 of them have enough width for somebody to get out of the streetcar in a wheelchair. And that's a huge infrastructure. It's a huge equity issue and discrimination issue, kind of, because, people, out of all the other stops, why can't I get off on these stops? Right. And how do we fix that? We need transportation vehicles with level boarding. So we need streetcars and a modern streetcar system that just allows for somebody to roll on and roll off. And that benefits not just people with mobility challenges, but moms and strollers and, people with a lot of papers climbing up stairs or in a briefcase, all the things. There's just so much. Did I answer your question?
You did. A quick clarification. What did you mean by how a ramp interacts with the landscape? I guess I didn't quite know exactly what you meant by that.
What I'm seeing now, like a lot of the new developments downtown, instead, because of flood elevation and them having to build a space up, they'll build the sidewalk up so that there's no steps, right, to get into that space. Now that the landscape and the terrain around it are kind of built in to be the ramp, and there's an easier traverse, if that's the right word. I think that's the right word, to get people into those spaces. Does that make sense?
That does make sense. Do you think is a higher priority concern for engineers? Would it be adapting existing infrastructure so that it becomes compliant? Because obviously there's lots of old infrastructure that wasn't, or focusing on new designs and new buildings so that they can now get it right for anything that's new.
I think it's a both and. The adapting and renovating old spaces is tricky. I get it. And typically we see that reflected in the cost per square foot for renovations, right? Being much more expensive than just a new construction. With new construction, we get to be innovative. We get to dream and think of all of these little things on the front end and not try to adapt it to something because we're trying to preserve something in a sense. But it's challenging. So I definitely think the adaptation is the hardest route, but on the new development side, it's so easy to incorporate as many universal design principles as possible in spaces.
So how do you feel about the current mandated requirements, such as ADA? Do they do enough, and what changes might you suggest?
I don't think they do enough. The ADA is 33 years old now. It hasn't been like substan substantially amended since its inception. So it didn't include like rental car companies having wheelchair accessible vehicles. I think the current requirement is for hotels and mixed use developments to have 5% of their room stock be ADA compliant. But I think a lot of times, again, people are checking the boxes for ADA and not really being creative and thinking about how people with disabilities function in those spaces. And so I don't know how they could amend that to be more reflective of the need, as much as um, having a better regulatory body of accessibility consultants that are making sure um, that the implementation is reflective of function and not just checking a box.
So since it seems like, what's getting done is from checking the boxes, do you think that those boxes need to be better, to be more spelled out and more intricate? Or is it on the designers and the developers to say, hey, these are, the boxes, but let's go beyond that and do better?
You know what? That's a great question. I think what the ADA missed is having accessibility consultants on every project. Like that should have been a part of it. Because when you have our voice at the table, there's things that you're going to miss because you're not living this experience, right? From an architect, developer, or an engineer's perspective, right? When you bring this experience in, now I can talk to you about why I need a door handle and not a doorknob, or this door needs to be wider. I don't think we should put that wall there because it's going to be divisive. It adds a barrier. Um, just all the little things, because sometimes they're thinking from, again, a beauty lens and not a function lens. And where am I putting little things that for somebody might be an obstacle?
I guess just from our engineers readers perspective, what should they do? Should they, when they're looking at a project, can they ask, hey, has this project been consulted with actual people with disabilities, or is it just you're looking at just the mandates that you're trying to fulfill?
I think it's exactly that. I think the engineers should want to seek accessibility consultants to make sure that the spaces they're designing and creating and building, um, just having somebody to look through and say, hey, this makes sense, but you added this little thing and this is going to be a problem for somebody.